campaigns that come from unions. And there were recently ads in Erie thanking Mrs. Dahlkemper for her vote for this health care bill. And the money was paid, that entire campaign was paid for by unions. I believe strongly that we should be subjecting our unions to the same antitrust laws that corporations are subjected to. And if we do that, that's going to make a level playing field on a lot of these other issues. Campaigns cost money because many of the times, it's like the folks that are sitting at this table today. Most of us are not well known at all of us, I should say, are not well known at all outside of the particular geographical region where we have resided. And the only way you can get your name out there is to be able to put your name in front of people. And that's one of the reasons why these campaigns cost money.
This question from the audience comes from Denny of Beatville. What's your stance on financial regulatory reform? Does the government need to crack down on financial instruments like derivatives that Congress has little understanding of? We start with Dr. Morrow.
What I don't like about this Obama fiscal care, whatever you want to call it, is it's going to give him the power to pick winners and losers. Him, Obama, and his administration, and that scares me to death. That this reform is going to give him the power and the administration the power to do that, and that is not good. I believe in the free market, and we need to let the free market pick who the winners and losers are. As far as the financial, I have a quote I quote quite often is, don't look to the government to fix problems that the government created. I didn't say that quite right, but you get the idea. Don't look to government to fix problems that the government created. And the government has created this financial thing. They wanted everybody in America to own their own home. And so they encouraged the banks, with a little bit of arm twisting. Janet Reno, I guess, was in charge of that back then, to make the banks do what they wanted. And so they started loaning these subprime mortgages and giving them no down payments and all this stuff. Well, then what happened in about 2007, maybe 6, the interest rates started going up. I think somebody knew what was going to happen when the interest rates started going up on all those adjustable rate mortgages. People couldn't afford them anymore, and that's what led to this collapse. And it's more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it, is that the government created this by wanting to kind of help people with houses, when people shouldn't have been in houses yet. They couldn't afford them. We need to go back to having a good down payment before you buy a house so that you have some investment in it. And so I kind of disagree that the financial market needs much reform. It probably needs some. But I think if, you know, the Rahm Emanuel, who's a scary guy, says, you know, never waste a crisis. And when they create their own crisis, they really don't waste it.
I agree with Martha. Basically, what the government's doing is they're handcuffing the industry out there. They're making it more difficult for them. You know, we saw what they did already when they worked with bailouts in the banks. It's harder for people to get money now. I mean, I know employers that said their credit lines were frozen or reduced, or they tried to get a line of credit to bring in a new product, and they couldn't do that. I know people that tried to refinance their homes, and they couldn't because they changed the percentages that they were allowed to give out. So, you know, they've already shown that they make it worse than it was to begin with. If they're going to go forward with this, I'd like to see them do something they haven't done yet in this administration. That's slow down the process. I'd like them to look at it and see, to talk to the experts in the field, and see what really is going to be the impact of these decisions, because so often what we hear from this administration was, it was the unintended consequence, but that's what we have to live with. And the concern that I have is that they're going to tell us, oh yeah, here's another one that was unintended. It's not what we really meant. When you see what they're doing out there, helping people with their mortgages and saying, we're going to help you refinance it, we're going to change the terms, we're going to change the length of time. The banks were relying on that money, that revenue coming in before. So when they start playing around with derivatives and say you have to track and account for where every dollar is coming from and everything that's involved with it all the way through, it's just more manipulation, more government control, and ultimately I think that's going to create more of a hardship for our country.
derivatives is what got us into this mess in the financial markets. We had investment bankers that were then able to sell mortgages, bundle them up as some really risky financial vehicles, explaining to the customer who was buying these that they were going to be able to get a 10%, 12% return on these things. And the vehicle itself was so risky that it would be like buying a bulletin board stock, a penny stock on the markets. This is what's happened with the whole financial market, that this all exploded. Even the banks, even the investment banks that were selling these derivatives didn't even know what they were doing. A couple of articles that I've read over the last couple of months, these guys were selling some very risky options, and it blew up, and it took this whole country down financially. I think that there needs to be regulation, that we need to have that barrier back again between the mortgage banks and the investment banks, so that we never face this again. The mortgage banks were also lending money to people who they shouldn't have had the ability to lend to. That's part of the other half of the house of cards that fell here over the last 2.5 years. That's because the federal government forced them to make those bad loans, especially in the inner city. They felt that if people owned their own house, they would be more responsible citizens and turn their city around. So when the banks were forced and guaranteed by the federal government to back those loans up, I think the banks took that as a green light and opened up the floodgates that the federal government would back them up again. And it's really harmed this country. That's why we're still in this mess, because I think there's still a lot of toxic waste out there in the financial sector. We do need to have some regulation back in the finance sector, and one of the ways to do that would be to put that barrier back up between the investment banks and the mortgage banks.
It's pretty much all been said. I mean, we know what the problems are, what caused it. My big concern is there's nobody ever brought account for almost collapsing our entire system. Not one person's done the perp walk, but everybody can point the fingers. We do need regulation, but I also believe that we are a free market capitalist system, and the government should not be getting involved in every little detail. Telling corporations what they can pay their employees and telling companies what cars to build, and the government's got its hand into too much right now. Again, we all saw how it started. The government put its hand in it. We saw the result. Thank you.
Well, I think this situation is indicative of this administration and this Congress with their ready, fire, aim strategy. There's an adequate amount of regulation in the banking community today. Fundamental problem started with the device of the Glass-Steagall Act from the 1930s, which was abolished in 1999, which allowed the investment banks and the commercial banks to participate in each other's markets. That was what led to this downfall and the meltdown of 2008. I wouldn't doubt that there are some needed regulations with regard to derivatives and hedge funds, because these are relatively new investment vehicles, if you want to call them that. I call them Las Vegas style capitalism, if you will, because they're really betting. That's exactly what they're doing. They're wagers on whether the market's going to go up or down for a certain particular type of investment. And if we have the wherewithal inside of the government to use or to impose the rules that are already on the books, we would not have had the meltdown in 2008. Our regulators and our congressional leaders let us down. It was the Securities and Exchange Commission, it was the Fed, and it was people like Barney Frank and Charlie Rangel that led the effort to allow this financial collapse to occur. And those are the folks that should be being held accountable to this financial collapse. We don't need a lot more regulation in the banking community.
I think there's enough blame to be spread around with what happened over the years. It did not start with this administration. It started way before this. And I got to tell you, a lot of the blame lies on our own shoulders, because we were willing to turn our savings over to people who we trusted, people who were going to get us a great return.